Street? Like, what is going on? And that is coupled with some rumors in town, or not, I shouldn't say rumors, but it was a few weeks ago, a pastor spoke out who knew the family. They did not want to be named. And upon this pastor speaking out, he had said, and people had kind of chimed in like, yeah, Christina Siders Lynn Siders was open about having all of her grandchildren live with her. And some of them even, were out and about with her at times. And she wasn't necessarily being secretive about it at all. So
Christina Siders just asked a judge to let her walk out of jail. Her argument, filed by her public defender, is that she didn't actually do anything wrong. And here's the part I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I read the motion. She might actually believe that. I need to be upfront with you about something, because I've been turning this case over in my head for weeks now, and the shape of it keeps changing on me. Every time I think I understand what happened inside that house on Omar Street, some new filing lands in the docket, and the picture shifts
House
again.
Of Horrors case. If you are not caught up, head to my playlist on this channel. And the last video I did, there wasn't too much, I guess, new information about their actual case, which is being presented to a grand jury soon, if it has not already. So hopefully they will return an indictment. I say hopefully, so we can get to the bottom of this very strange case. I mean, the more I learn, the more confused, I guess, I am.
I told you in the last video that Gary Siders Jr. had requested a competency evaluation and the judge granted it. What I didn't know then, what nobody was talking about yet, was that Christina Siders, the grandmother, the woman the media keeps calling the matriarch of this household, filed the exact same request through her own attorney.
For a competency evaluation. That was granted by the judge. They were also asking his lawyers for everything to be sealed. The request to be sealed, which was very strange in my opinion, and also the results citing, privacy issues, HIPAA, etc. So the judge was basically like, yes, it's granted. And look, by the way, it's not like some big feat to get an evaluation like that granted. I mean, if a judge wouldn't grant that and the defendant goes to trial, is found guilty, and clearly doesn't know where they are or what's going on, obviously that's grounds for appeal, and a judge just wants to avoid that if they can. And so he was granted the evaluation, and all of the results in terms of just his mental health, anything relating to psychiatric records, those will be sealed, but the actual request, not sealed. The judge was like, I don't really see the purpose of that. So that's granted. And also Christina Lynn Siders, his mother, has also requested through her lawyers a competency evaluation, and that has been granted. So as of right now, Elizabeth Siders is the only—
That evaluation was granted too. So as of right now, 2 of the 4 adults arrested in that home are being assessed to determine whether they're even competent to stand trial. Elizabeth Siders, the daughter-in-law, hasn't filed that motion yet. Gary Sr. hasn't either, though frankly I have questions about him that I'll get to.
We'll see what happens. I mean, I'm kind of like, I don't think it would hurt anyone if Elizabeth and Christina were released and had ankle monitors. That's sort of how I feel right now. But we'll see. It's really a shame because they cannot afford this bail. And I told you, I've gone back.
But the fact that Christina's legal strategy now includes an argument that she can't fully participate in her own defense, that changes how we have to look at everything she said in her bond motion. Let's walk through what she's claiming, because the filing is public. I linked it in the episode notes so you can read every page yourself.
Okay. The available facts indicate that the charges pertain to allegations that the defendant, along with her husband, permitted her daughter-in-law, her son, and their children to reside in their home. On the date the charges are alleged to have occurred, authorities were present at the defendant's home only to serve a misdemeanor warrant upon the defendant's son, Gary Siders Jr. Neither the defendant, her daughter-in-law, nor her husband were suspected of criminal conduct. At the home, authorities encountered unsanitary conditions, and the defendant's grandchildren were removed from their parents' care. All 4 adults in the home have been charged with 1 count of endangering children for each of the children in the home. There is no allegation that the defendant used or had access to a weapon, nor that the defendant committed any acts of violence against any alleged victim, and there is no evidence that the defendant participated in any acts of abuse causing serious physical harm to any of the alleged victims. Rather, it is evident the defendant was the only adult in the home who had been providing for all the other adults and all the children residing in her home. The defendant was also tasked, I skipped something. Defendant paid for rent, utilities, and other necessities in the home. Despite her own medical conditions, defendant was also tasked with caring for her husband and his significant medical needs and physical limitations. Okay.
Her attorney argues that authorities showed up at the Siders home on June 30th for one reason and one reason only: to serve a misdemeanor warrant on Gary Siders Jr. for public indecency charges. 4 counts, all stemming from something that allegedly happened in May of 2026. That's what brought law enforcement to the door. Not a child welfare check, not a tip about abuse, a misdemeanor warrant for the son.
Whatever. It was alleged that authorities showed up to the Siders Omar Street home on June 30th because Gary Siders had these 4 public indecency charges. Those are misdemeanors, by the way. Those were all stemming from something he did in May of 2026. So that's kind of what the narrative was. Yeah, they showed up for Gary Siders Jr. and then they discovered, these kids living in deplorable conditions, and it led to this. Well, then I think it was Gary Siders Sr.'s attorney, Adrian Baum, who kind of came out and was like, it was a local interview. And I may have played it on this channel. I can't recall because I've done a lot of videos. But he said, I just don't think that's the case because that would be crazy for all these cops to show up or this to be such a big deal over, a public indecency misdemeanor. So he kind of was like, that's not why they were there. It was a different investigation, whatever. And then we kind of all ran with that narrative in the media. Well, Christina Siders, in her filing, she actually says, this wasn't even supposed to happen. Authorities showed up on another warrant for my son, Gary Siders Jr. on, a mis.
And Christina's motion says, essentially, look what happened next. The officers walked in, they saw unsanitary conditions, and then they arrested everyone. Every adult in the home. Her husband, her son, her daughter-in-law. And the filing draws a hard line here that I want you to really sit with because it's the core of her entire argument. Quote, there is no allegation that the defendant used or had access to a weapon, nor that the defendant committed any acts of violence against any alleged victim, and there is no evidence that the defendant participated in any acts of abuse causing serious physical harm to any of the alleged victims. End quote. She goes further. She says she was the only adult in that house providing for everyone. She paid the rent. She paid the utilities. She bought the necessities. She cared for her husband, who has what her attorney describes as significant medical needs and physical limitations. The portrait she's painting of herself is not a perpetrator. It's a caregiver stretched past her breaking point.
Like they discovered unsanitary conditions and then arrested us all, basically. And she said in the filing, there is no proof of any abuse here, any wrongdoing. Like I'm not being charged, as having illegal weapons. I'm not being charged as physically abusing these kids. She's like, all I am basically guilty of, and I'm paraphrasing, is allowing my grandchildren and my daughter-in-law and my son to stay at our home. That's what she says. And then, she goes on to kind of say that she is the one that pays all the bills and, quote, takes care of everybody. That was interesting because I was like, I wouldn't say that, because the whole reason the kids are not there is because they were not being cared for, allegedly. So, she talks about also caring for her husband who has medical issues. And again, like arguing this is not where she belongs. She does not need to be incarcerated. And also like, this is not really fair. She's basically indigent. She can't pay all of this money that you guys are asking. So they want it lowered or released.
And here's where I have to stop and tell you that part of me, when I first read this motion, felt something shift. Because I'd been operating under the assumption, and I think a lot of you had too, that what happened in that house was deliberate. That 4 adults made choices, together, that led to children living in conditions so bad that 2 of them were reportedly close to death when authorities found them. That's what the early reporting suggested. That's what the charges implied. But Christina's motion doesn't read like someone who understands what she's being accused of. It reads like someone who genuinely cannot see the harm. And that might be the most disturbing thing in this entire case. Let me give you the prosecution's framework, because it's sitting right there in the charges, and it doesn't require us to guess about anyone's intentions. There were children in that house. The number that's been reported is 16, though some accounts vary. Those children were living in conditions that law enforcement described, under oath in charging documents, as deplorable and unsanitary. 2 of those children were allegedly in such severe medical distress that they were near death when they were removed. Those are not my words. Those are the words used by the authorities who walked through that door on June 30th. Now, Christina's motion says she didn't know. Or more precisely, her motion says there's no evidence she committed acts of abuse, causing serious physical harm. But endangering children, the charge she's actually facing, doesn't require her to have personally harmed anyone. It requires a reckless disregard for their safety. And a house full of children where 2 are close to dying. That's not a house where someone was paying attention. That's not a house where the caregiver was providing what those kids needed.
And again, I go back to saying, I wouldn't sit there and say you took care of everybody, because this is one of the reasons why, everyone's in this position, is because people weren't being cared for. But also, how do you expect an almost 70-year-old woman to care for 16 kids?
I want you to think about the layout of this home.
Weren't being cared for, but also, how do you expect an almost 70-year-old woman to care for 16 kids? Also, I wonder how, I believe we've gone through, or one of my stories went through the layout of the house, because I went to the county auditor's website. I was looking at the home. 1 bathroom for 20 people is insane, but the kids weren't in the basement. So if law enforcement walks in the home, I believe they were in a room that's kind of close to the entryway. So I think that it would be very easy for law enforcement to see.
I pulled the county auditor's records in an earlier video. 1 bathroom. 20 people living inside. The children weren't hidden in a basement or locked in an attic. They were in a room near the entryway, visible the moment anyone walked in. Which means the conditions law enforcement saw on June 30th. Those conditions had been there. Those children had been there. Visible. And no one called. No one removed them. No one, according to Christina's own filing, did anything except keep paying the bills. That's the gap her motion can't close. She wants the court to believe she was just a grandmother letting her family stay in her home. She wants us to see a 66-year-old woman with medical problems of her own, stretched thin, doing her best. But the children in that house weren't just living in poverty. Poverty is not a crime. The charges aren't about being poor. They're about children being in conditions so dangerous that their lives were at risk. And 4 adults who were present every single day apparently not intervening.
On the fact that a public indecency charge, and Gary Siders reportedly has 4 of them, that can also indicate that it's adjacent with possible SA, if you know what I'm saying. Not making any false allegations, just something to consider here. He does seem to be a lot of the focus of this case because he seems to be the one that looks to be the most well-fed out of anybody. Elizabeth Siders is very small. I had mentioned in the last video, Gary Siders Sr., when he is seen getting out of the van when he was arrested, and he's kind of not walking, but he's in the wheelchair and he's sort of next to his son, Gary Siders Jr. looks like he hasn't missed a meal in so long, and Gary Siders Sr. looks smaller. Significantly smaller. Again, Elizabeth Siders, she looks so bony. It's just, and I don't mean that in a judgy way. I just mean that I just don't think that this case here is like, oh, they were neglecting the kids to keep more for themselves. I just don't think, you know what I mean? I think when you hear about, you compare it to the Turpin case, the Turpins were eating and eating fast food in front of the kids and starving the kids and torturing them this way. Look, I don't know, or I don't think that was the case for at least Elizabeth.
So here's what I'm asking you, and I want you to really weigh this, because I've been going back and forth on it myself. If Christina Siders was the only person paying the bills, if she was, as her motion claims, the sole provider for every adult and every child in that home, then doesn't that mean she had more control over the situation than anyone else? And if she had control, if she was the one keeping the lights on and the rent paid, what does it mean that the conditions got as bad as they did on her watch? I'm not asking rhetorically. I genuinely want to hear your take in the comments, because I've seen this argued both ways, and both sides have a point. One argument says she was an overwhelmed grandmother with too many dependents and not enough resources, doing what she could. The other argument says she was the one adult in the home with actual financial agency, and that agency came with a responsibility she failed. Which one lands harder for you? Now, let me address the defense that I think her attorney is building toward, because I can see the shape of it, even if it hasn't been fully argued yet. The competency evaluations matter. If Christina Siders and her son are both found incompetent to stand trial, that doesn't mean they walk free. It means they can't participate in their own defense, which pauses the criminal proceedings and sends them to treatment. But it also raises a question that I think the defense wants a jury to consider eventually. If someone isn't mentally competent enough to understand the charges against them, were they mentally competent enough to recognize the danger their grandchildren were in? That's a real legal argument. It's not nothing.
If what authorities claimed at the beginning was true with these kids being, 2 of them basically close to death, I mean, how do you not know that? I don't have words for that. But again, I also go back to them living in extreme poverty. And if 80% of them are not mentally competent, I'm kind of like, I just have questions. However, I have said this before, I just don't think Gary Sr., I don't think he should be charged and he should be facing anything like this, because I don't think that he is totally with it. I just don't. I don't think that's fair.
Here's why I don't think it's enough. Endangering children is a general intent crime in Ohio. That means the prosecution doesn't have to prove someone intended to cause harm. They have to prove the person acted recklessly, and that recklessness created a substantial risk to the children's health or safety. You don't need a psychological evaluation to recognize that children in your own home are visibly ill, visibly suffering, visibly in need of medical care that they're not getting. You don't need to be a doctor. You need to have eyes. The forensic piece of this case hasn't been fully presented yet. The grand jury is still reviewing it. But we know what the evidence will likely include. Medical records for every child removed from that home. Testimony from the first responders who walked through the door. Photographs and video of the conditions inside. And the statements of all 4 adults, each of whom has apparently given their own account of what happened and how long it had been going on. That evidence doesn't change based on whether Christina Siders thinks she did anything wrong. It just sits there, waiting to be shown to a jury. I don't know what the grand jury will decide. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I do. What I know is that the process is moving forward, and when the indictment comes down, if it comes down, the picture is going to get sharper fast. The competency evaluations will be complete. The medical evidence will be cataloged. And the 4 adults who were in that house will each have to answer for what the evidence shows. One thing I'm watching closely is whether all 4 defendants are tried together. The charges are identical right now. 1 count of endangering children for each child in the home, per adult. That usually means a joint trial. But if competency becomes a dividing line, if some defendants are found fit for trial and others aren't, we could see severance motions that split this case apart. That would mean multiple trials, which in a county like Vinton County, with limited resources and a small courthouse, would be a logistical nightmare.
I'm staying on this case. I'm on it. Should this go to trial? I will be there. I will be there covering it. You better believe it. I cannot imagine, by the way, that they separate this trial. I think all 4 defendants will be tried together because they are being charged with the same thing. I have seen trials where defendants are charged with the same thing and they want them severed for different reasons, but that would be absolutely insane. I mean, I don't think Vinton County would be able to do that anyway. Hold for, you know what I mean? Resources, witnesses,
I'll be there either way. If this goes to trial, I will be in that courtroom. You have my word. Here's what I can tell you with confidence. The forensic tools exist to determine exactly what happened to those children. Medical examinations will show the duration and severity of any neglect. The house itself was documented the day law enforcement entered it. The evidence has been collected. The science doesn't lie. Whatever the truth is, it's already in the record. We just haven't seen it yet. I don't know if Christina Siders is guilty of the charges she's facing. But I know her bond motion argued that she was the caregiver, the provider, the one holding everything together. And that argument, more than anything her attorney could have said, tells me how far apart her understanding of this case is from what the evidence is likely to show. Because the person holding everything together doesn't lose 2 children to the edge of death without noticing. I'll be on top of the grand jury decision. When it comes, you'll hear it here first, completely, without flinching. Thanks for being here. I'm Lauren Conlin.